All right, welcome everyone. I'm Dale Wheeler, and today I'll be presenting you information about fall planting bulbs and more, since bulbs is just one thing that you can plant in the fall. Personally, I really enjoy planting in the fall because it makes me start thinking about springtime growth already, and then throughout the winter when it's gloomy and dark, I can anticipate and envision the beautiful springtime blooms that should emerge from the ground from what I've planted in the fall. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the fall planting of bulbs, rhizomes, tubers, crowns, and cloves. And on this slide, you'll see some of the examples then of each one. So first, let's cover some definitions. A bulb is an underground storage structure which contains the entire life cycle of the plant. Bulbs are typically perennial. Bulbs have a period of growth and flowering, followed by a period of dormancy at the end of each growing season. Rhizomes consist of a tuber and roots. The tuber part goes horizontally along the soil surface with rooting structures attached to the tubers. Rhizomes produce pips, which are the new plant growth originating out of the growing tubers. When transplanting, rhizomes are dug up in the early fall, and the new pips are separated. And then the rhizomes and any new pips are replanted. A tuber does not have a basal plate where the roots develop. Tubers do not have a protective covering. Caladium bulbs have buds on the tuber surface where the shoots and the roots originate. So if you can see in the upper right-hand picture that those little buds that are on the caladium tubers, those are all the points on the tuber itself where the roots and the shoots originate out of the tuber itself. Some examples of tubers would include caladiums, oxalis, peonies, and anemones. Crowns store nutrients, and crowns are propagated then by dividing. Fleshy root crowns should be divided in the fall, and at least 3 crown buds should be left with each clump when transplanting. Rhubarb are hardy perennial herbaceous plants. Rhubarb has deep green foliage during the growing season, and the crowns go into dormancy during the winter. Cloves have 5 major parts. The basal plate, which is the bottom of the clove, is the location with where the roots grow. The fleshy scales along the sides are the primary storage tissue. The tunic is the skin-like covering that protects the fleshy scales. The shoot, which consists of the developing flower and the leaf buds, and finally the lateral buds, which develop into offshoots as new cloves. Asiatic lilies have imbricate bulbs. Imbricate bulbs do not have a tunic to protect the fleshy scales. Imbricate bulbs must be kept constantly moist before planting, since the scales will be injured if they dry out. Asiatic lilies are propagated from bulbils that develop in the leaf axils of the plant. And it requires more than 1 year for the bulbils to become large enough to flower. Now, what are some of the typical plants and typical bulbs that you might plant in your garden? Well, some of the more common ones that we are familiar with that you are likely to plant include crocus and hyacinth bulbs, but there are other bulbs that we can also plant. Red spider lilies, harlequin flowers, alliums, and guinea hen flowers. There's grape hyacinth and squill, Grecian windflowers and snowflake, snowdrops, Arabian starflowers. You can also grow paper whites in zones 8 through 11, and wolfsbane. And finally, the most familiar are the tulips and the daffodils. So here is a planting depth chart for various bulbs. And the major takeaway from this chart is essentially that the larger the bulb, then the deeper the planting depth. And there's many, many bulbs that are on here, and we'll be talking about a few of them. But you can see that the depth ranges all the way down to about 6 inches for the daffodils and the Asiatic lilies. So today I'm going to talk about how to plant tulip bulbs, but the same general guidelines can apply to any of the bulbs that I just mentioned to. So just keep that in mind. You do want to plant your bulbs in the fall before the ground is frozen, giving time for the roots of the bulb to grow and become well established. The roots themselves, once they're planted, go down into the soil, they absorb the nutrients come up into the bulb itself, and it gives the bulb that extra nutrients and the extra storage then for when the temperatures begin to warm up in the spring, and it has sufficient new energy to create the bloom that everyone is expecting. You do want to plant in a location with at least half-day sun and in a well-drained soil with a pH between 6 and 6.5. Loosen the soil to a depth of 8 to 12 inches and mix in organic matter or compost into the soil. It is important to measure the height of your bulbs. So for example, tulip bulbs are typically about 2 inches tall, daffodils around 3 inches tall, and crocus bulbs around 1/2 inch tall. You want to dig a hole, sorry. You want to dig your hole that you're going to plant your bulb to a depth that is 3 times the height of your bulb. If your tulip bulb is, for example, 2 inches tall, you want to dig your hole 6 inches deep. Space your holes twice the distance apart as the bulb is high. So, for example, if your bulb is 2 inches in height, space your holes twice that height or 4 inches apart. Plant one bulb in each of the holes. Cover the bulbs with soil, and then you want to top dress the bed with an organic or a balanced slow release fertilizer. A slow release fertilizer can be a resin or polymer coated fertilizer, which releases the nutrients slowly as it breaks down in the soil. And the reason that you want to do this instead of putting the fertilizer directly into the soil itself is because those newly growing roots that originate out of the bulb when it's first planted can be damaged or burned if the fertilizer comes in direct contact with that. So to minimize the damage to the bulb itself, you want to top dress with fertilizer, put it on the top of the soil, and then through time, the fertilizer will work down into the bulb bed, and it'll give the bulbs the nutrients that they need while they grow without burning them. Lightly cultivate then the fertilizer into the upper part of the soil, and then thoroughly soak the bed with water. Make sure the bulbs get about 1 inch of water per week throughout the fall. Roots will be forming during this time in preparation for blooming in the spring. Rhizomes store nutrients and grow horizontally along the soil surface, providing support for the growing plant. And when faced with adverse growing conditions, rhizomes store reserved nutrients. Plants that have rhizomes are typically perennial. These plants lose their leaves and their surface parts during the winter months when rhizomes preserve the nutrients for the plant to survive. Since their growth is indefinite, rhizomes can grow to cover large areas of the ground. Reproduction of the rhizomes is asexual, and from a rhizome fragment, shoots, roots, and new plants called pips then can emerge. Transplantation in the fall promotes reproduction and growth. Some of the examples of plants that have rhizomes include the bearded iris and also the Siberian iris. You want to plant rhizomes in late August through October when nighttime temperatures are in their 40s. Fall planting provides time for the rhizomes to become established by growing roots prior to winter and in preparation for spring blooming. I will say that I have already transplanted my iris a few weeks ago. I dug up the beds and I put them in, so I'll be referring to some of that as we go through. You do want to select a location with full sun, and while iris tolerate partial sun, bearded iris will not bloom as prolifically without abundant sun. Iris grow best in well-drained fertile soil that has a pH between 6.5 and 7. You do want to loosen the soil to a depth of 12 inches. This gives the rooting system of the rhizome enough room to grow easily into the soil. You want to mix in 2 to 4 inches of organic matter or compost and work that well into the soil. When transplanting, then dig up and divide the established patch of iris as shown. Reject any mushy or desiccated rhizomes. Inspect for any borer damage which may have occurred, and damaged sections may be clipped away using sharp pruners. So when you pull up your rhizomes, and in this case iris, you do want to look at the entire rhizome itself and check to see if there's any places with severe damage, if they're soft in any way, and if there's any borer damage in the roots. Use sharp pruners, clip them off, and you'll notice that the rooting system that's here at the bottom of the rhizome, you want to maintain and protect as much of that as possible to use when you then go to transplant. If there's any new growth that you see in the form of pips, make sure that there is a good rooting structure that's also associated with that pip, and you can cut that new growth separately and then be able to transplant that with the rest of your other cuttings. You do want to trim your leaves above the rhizome to about 6 to 8 inches in length. I cut each of mine to about 6 inches. You want to dig holes that are 4 inches deep and 10 inches wide. You can also dig a 4-inch trench instead of individual holes. It is important then to create a narrow mound of soil in the bottom of each hole or the trench. And then you want to spread the roots naturally over the mound as they originate out of the bottom of the rhizome. The fleshy part of the rhizome should rest on top of the mound with the remaining leaves pointed upwards. So you can see in these pictures that the roots themselves naturally come out away from the rhizome part of it itself. And if you have this mound in the bottom of your hole or your trench, then those roots should be spread out and allow them to drape naturally over that mound to give them space to grow, and so that they're not stressed when you go to plant them. Fill the hole with amended fill soil. Tamp the soil firmly down against and around the rhizome and the leaves. And then leave a part of the rhizome exposed when planting in the ground or in the potting soil if you're planting the rhizome in a pot. So you can see in the picture in the bottom right-hand corner that you can still see the top of the rhizome itself. The bottom part of the rhizome and the root structure is all below the soil surface. And then this is the way that you want to plant your rhizomes, the transplant. Water generously every few days until new growth is evident. You can tell the new growth as the new leaves are pointed, whereas the horizontal cut leaves that were when you planted the rhizome itself. Continue to water weekly until the new rhizome is well established. Other types of rhizomes that you may want to consider growing yourself include common ginger. Mint has rhizomes, and the new mint plants rise out of the rhizomes as they grow across the soil surface. Solomon seal is a rhizomatous plant. There's both clumping bamboo and running bamboo, which have rhizomes, and turmeric. Now, you might not think that you can grow your own turmeric, but I found these directions really intriguing, and I'm going to be planting turmeric myself this fall, and I'm going to give you the directions on how to do this yourself. So you want to cut the rhizomes of the turmeric plant into 2-inch pieces and plant indoors in late October. Turmeric requires lots of space for the roots, and it needs significant humidity for early growth. You want to use a pot that's at least 12 inches deep. Plant your pieces 4 inches apart and 3 inches deep with the buds of the rhizome pointed upwards. Water the soil until visibly moist, and then slip each pot into a clear plastic bag. This is to maintain the humidity level that the turmeric rhizomes require. Store your pots in a warm place, somewhere between 70 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Use a heat mat or a heat lamp if needed. Water every 2 to 3 days to keep the soil visibly damp. Turmeric rhizomes prefer moist soil, but not drenched soil. Turmeric rhizomes may not show any growth for 5 to 6 months. So don't give up hope, but it may be until March or April before you see the first signs of growth coming out of your rhizomes. Up pot when the stalks are about 6 inches tall. It's about 8 months after you plant them. Usually this occurs in late June. You want to up pot into a pot that's at least 18 inches deep, and then plant each set of rhizome stalks into individual pots. Relocate outdoors to a partial sun location. Water your soil until visibly moist, at least every 2 to 3 days, and then harvest your turmeric when the leaves and the stems start to brown and dry, typically in early September. And if you have success and you pull the plants out of the ground, then hopefully what you'll see are all these fresh new turmeric rhizomes that you can use for your own use. Pretty cool. All right. Peonies are such fragrant and beautiful flowers. I'm going to use planting peonies and peony tubers as my example for planting tubers. Peonies have been cultivated for over 2,000 years. They grow well in full sun or partial shade. Peonies prefer rich, fertile, medium moisture, well-drained soil. They're deer resistant, which is always nice. The flowers attract butterflies, good pollinators. Peonies are virtually pest-free. They are low maintenance once established, and peonies can be long-lived, sometimes up to 50 years. Peony tubers are best planted in the fall, and it's best to wait until nighttime temperatures are in the 40s. You want to plant tubers at least 6 weeks prior to a hard ground freeze. And peonies need a pronounced winter chilling to bloom well. Well, what does that mean, a pronounced winter chilling? Well, peonies need about 30 to 40 days of cold temperature below 40 degrees, which equates to about 700 hours over the course of the winter in which the temperatures are below 40 degrees. Peonies need at least 6 hours of sun. Full sun is best. Peonies prefer a soil pH between 6.5 and 7. You do want to space your peony tubers 3 to 4 feet apart when planting so that the mature large plants have good air circulation underneath. Dig a hole that's 24 inches deep, 24 inches across. Yeah, I know that sounds like a large hole, but the rooting system becomes quite large for a large plant. So you do need to work the soil up to that particular depth and that far across. Add about 4 inches of organic matter or compost. Then add about a half a cup of 10-6-4 or similar fertilizer into each hole. Also mix in some bone meal or some superphosphate, and then mix all together into the loose soil. Set the peony tuber so that the eyes face upwards on top of firmed soil. And I'll come back to this. So set the eyes of the tuber then so that they rest just 2 inches below the soil surface. So if we look at the diagram itself, you'll notice a couple things. One is that the fleshy tuberous part of the peony itself is fairly fragile. You want to be very gentle, and then you want to lay it on this firm surface. And the reason that you want the soil below the tuber to be quite firm is because when you then cover the peony itself, you don't want it to sink deeper into the soil because then it may not bloom. If you'll notice in the examples, it'll show that the eyes themselves must be just 2 inches below the soil surface itself. Research has shown that if the eyes are planted any deeper than the 2 inches, that it's less likely that your plant will actually bloom. So it's real important to do measurements. It's real important to have that firmed soil underneath, and then be very, very gentle when you plant the tuber itself. Filling the hole, when you fill the hole, make sure the soil does not bury the tuber any deeper than 2 inches below the soil surface, and your peony may not bloom. This is one of the most key parts then when planting your peony tubers. Water thoroughly throughout the fall to ensure new plant growth receives about 1 inch of water per week throughout the fall. All right. Peonies typically do not flower during the first year after planting, and it may even take 2 to 3 years to produce the showy, fragrant blooms. An example of crowns to be planted in the fall is rhubarb. Rhubarb originated in Asia. It was brought to Europe in the 1600s. Only the stalks are edible. Rhubarb is a perennial. It is low maintenance and can be very productive. You do want to plant rhubarb in its own dedicated space. It doesn't like to be crowded, and so give it its own space. It grows best undisturbed for several years, and it grows best with plenty of well-rotted manure or compost. A single plant can grow to be 3 feet by 3 feet or even larger. Rhubarb requires full sun with lots of space. You want to plant rhubarb in well-drained soil with a pH of 6.5 to 7.5. And you want to loosen the soil where it's being planted to at least 24 inches deep. I just replanted my rhubarb crowns this fall. I indeed did dig down to 24 inches deep. It sounds like it's really deep for the crowns, but indeed there's a tap root that goes down, and it's important that you have some loosened soil down to that depth. Mix in lots of organic matter or compost. I can't emphasize enough that rhubarb is a heavy feeder. You want to dig holes in your space 4 to 5 inches. I actually had my holes that were 6 to 8 inches across to accommodate the crowns that I had. Holes should be set 3 to 4 feet apart, which allows plenty of room for the future mature rhubarb plants to grow. You want to plant your crowns 2 inches below the soil surface. Gently fill the hole surrounding the crown, then with heavy compost. Personally, I also cover the crowns themselves with 2 inches of heavy compost instead of more soil. I actually put the compost itself directly on top of the crowns. Thoroughly water after planting. Ensure the crowns receive about 1 inch of water per week throughout the fall while the crowns are being established in preparation for spring emergence. And then cover the rhubarb bed with 3 inches of mulch during the winter. When growing garlic, you want to plant your cloves from late October through November. Garlic requires 8 to 9 months to produce a large, mature bulb. There are over 600 cultivars of garlic and 2 varieties. The hardneck variety is more flavorful, easier to peel, and grows well in cold winters. Hardneck garlic grows best in zones 0 through 6. The softneck variety has better storage, grows well in warm winter areas, grows best in zones 8 through 12, and is recommended for Cowlitz County. Now you'll notice that zone 7 is missing. These are the zones in which the garlic grows best. Where I live, I actually think I'm actually on the border between zone 8 and 7. And so if you live in zone 7 or on the edge, it is suggested that you try both varieties to see which variety grows best in your particular location. Garlic requires a period of cold weather, 40 to 50 degrees for 6 to 10 weeks to develop multiple cloves. And this cold weather development period is called vernalization. Garlic requires full sun in the summer. The growing cloves require regular watering, about 1 inch per week. Dry conditions during the bulbing period will result in small bulbs or cloves. Your yield will depend on 2 different stages of growth: of vegetative growth, which occurs in the fall and the winter, and a bulbing growth period then during the spring and summer. During the vegetative growth period, the plant requires adequate water. It establishes the root growth, supplying nutrients to the bulb itself, and sprouting of the leaves. Bulb formation begins as temperatures rise in the spring and the day length increases. When planting, you'll notice that each bulb contains several cloves. You'll want to separate each clove uh, before planting. So you'll have your bulb, you separate out each of these various cloves. The larger outer cloves that are associated with the bulb yield the larger size mature bulbs then at harvest. So if you have plenty of bulbs, then plant only the cloves, the large cloves that are from the outside of each bulb. Do not divide your bulb into the cloves prior to planting. If you do this, when you split the cloves from the bulb, it stimulates the roots to begin growing. And if it's not in the soil, then the root system will die. You do want to plant in a location that has full sun, in well-drained soil with plenty of organic matter, in a location left undisturbed until harvest. You'll want to incorporate organic matter. This would be well-rotted manure or compost. You do want to add new organic matter into your soil every year prior to planting. So if you're using the same location to grow your garlic this year that you did last year, be sure to incorporate new, fresh organic matter into the soil prior to planting. The organic matter supplies sufficient micronutrients and apply it at about 1 pound per square foot. I've already incorporated my organic matter. I have a relatively new bed that I'm putting in, so I actually applied and put on about 2 pounds of organic matter myself for this year. Garlic has a medium to high demand for nitrogen. You want to apply your nitrogen early in the fall prior to planting. The rate that you should apply is 1 pound of 10-10-10 or blood meal or ammonium nitrate per 100 square foot. I added blood meal and did add about 1 pound per 100 square foot for my area. Again, you'll notice on this slide it says prior to planting, and I'll come back to this in just a minute. You'll also want to add nitrogen, additional nitrogen in the early spring prior to bulbing when the shoots themselves are 4 to 6 inches tall. You'll add additional nitrogen at this time to help with the bulbing process. You'll add 2 pounds this time per 100 square feet, again, of either 10-10-10 blood meal or ammonium nitrate. Garlic also has a medium to high demand for phosphorus and potassium. Again, apply this in the early fall prior to planting, a rate of about 1 pound of 10-10-10, or you can use the higher amounts with a 5-15-10, again per 100 square feet. Calcium and magnesium are also important. The optimum soil pH for garlic is 6 to 7. And if your soil pH registers below 5.8, it is recommended that you add lime. If you add dolomitic lime, then both the calcium and magnesium will be added into the soil. I tested my soil pH and it was at 6.2, so I didn't need to add any lime. Now I want to come back to this idea about prior to planting, and this is kind of important. So now is the time that you want to be incorporating some of your nutrients and your amendments into the soil if you plan to plant later in October or into November. The organic matter, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium, all should be incorporated a few weeks in advance to give it time, a little bit time for it to break down prior to the planting and put into the soil before you plant. Garlic requires consistent, even watering, 1 inch a week throughout the entire growing process. Water stress, especially during bulbing, will result in small bulbs than in small cloves. Excessively dry soil will create irregularly shaped bulbs, and excessively wet soil may cause the bulbs to rot. Dig trenches or holes to plant your bulbs. Place each unpeeled clove with the pointed end up. This will ensure a straight neck during growth. Plant your bulbs 4 inches apart in rows that are 12 inches apart. Cover each clove then with 1 to 3 inches of soil. Here is an example of how you plant the garlic clove. You'll see that it's unpeeled, and then the little pointed end is upwards, whereas the basal plate where the roots will grow then is pointed down. So this is a dedicated bed for garlic. You can plant yours you want a dedicated bed about this same size, and you can see how much garlic you can put into a bed of this size. Over the winter, you do want to mulch the garlic bed with 3 to 4 inches of mulch. And garlic can also be grown in containers. Be careful to provide plenty of room then for each growing clove. So in summary today, I've given you some examples on planting tulip bulbs, bearded iris rhizomes, turmeric rhizomes, peony tubers, rhubarb crowns, and garlic cloves. The references that I use for today's talk are given here. And finally, are there any questions?